Fleet Commander Zorthak had seen many impossible things in his 50 years of military service for the Valerian Empire, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed in the Kepler 442 system that day. His battle fleet of 12 massive dreadnoughts had been conducting a routine patrol when their sensors detected something that made every physicist in the Empire question their sanity. "Commander," called out Science Officer Dixtel, his voice trembling with disbelief. "The readings we're getting, they can't be real. They violate every known law of physics." Zorthak's 8 eyes focused on the main display. What he saw made his blood freeze. A human vessel, no larger than a Valerian scout ship, was moving through space at what appeared to be 50 times the speed of light. Not through hyperspace or dimensional folding, but through normal space-time itself. "That's impossible," Zorthak whispered. "Nothing can exceed light speed in real space without infinite energy." "Sir, it gets worse," Dixtel continued, his clawed hands shaking as he operated his instruments. "The ship isn't using any detectable propulsion system. No engines, no energy emissions, no gravitational manipulation. It's moving by pure violation of physics." The human ship suddenly stopped, defying every law of momentum and inertia. Then, as the Valerian fleet watched in stunned silence, the small vessel began to duplicate itself. One ship became 2, then 4, then 8. Each copy was identical down to the quantum level, appearing from nothing with no energy input whatsoever. "Commander," gasped Navigation Officer Heelnex, "mass is being created from vacuum. The conservation of energy law just stopped working." Zorthak felt his world crumbling around him. The Valerian Empire had built its dominance on superior understanding of science and technology. They were the masters of physics, the beings who had unlocked the deepest secrets of the universe. Yet here were humans, a species they had dismissed as primitive, casually breaking the fundamental rules that governed all existence. The impossible demonstration continued. One of the human ships approached a nearby asteroid and simply touched it. The space rock, which had existed for billions of years, instantly transformed into pure energy that formed geometric patterns in space like some cosmic art display. Matter to energy conversion without antimatter, without any known process. "Contact them," Zorthak ordered, his voice barely steady. "Valerian fleet, this is Captain Jessica Kane of the Earth vessel Transcendence," came the reply in perfect Valerian, though no human should have been able to speak their language. "We detected your approach and thought we'd demonstrate some of our recent discoveries. I hope we haven't alarmed you." "Captain Kane," Zorthak managed to say, "what you're doing is impossible. You're violating fundamental laws of physics." There was a sound that might have been laughter. "Commander, we've learned that what you call laws of physics are more like suggestions. Reality is far more flexible than most species realize." As if to prove her point, Captain Kane's ship suddenly appeared in 12 different locations simultaneously, surrounding the Valerian fleet. Each ship was real, each had mass and energy signatures, yet they were all the same vessel existing in multiple states at once. "How?" Zorthak breathed. "We discovered that consciousness can interact directly with quantum fields," Captain Kane explained casually, as if discussing weather. "Once you understand that the universe is essentially information processing itself into existence, you can begin to edit the code, so to speak." The Valerian science officer Dixtel was frantically running diagnostics on his instruments. "Commander, our sensors confirm everything we're seeing. This isn't illusion or technology we don't understand. They are literally rewriting the laws of physics in real time." One of the human ships casually reached out and touched the fabric of space-time itself, creating visible ripples that spread outward like waves on water. Gravity reversed direction in a small area, causing debris to fall upward. Time itself seemed to flow backward around another ship as explosions from ancient stellar events played in reverse. "We've been watching your empire for some time," Captain Kane continued, her voice carrying an otherworldly calm. "Your science is impressive by conventional standards, but you're still bound by the old rules. We've moved beyond that limitation." Zorthak realized with growing horror that his entire fleet, representing the pinnacle of Valerian military might, was completely helpless. How do you fight beings who can ignore the basic laws that govern weapons, shields, and energy itself? His plasma cannons were useless against ships that could simply decide that energy didn't affect them. His gravity weapons were meaningless against beings who could rewrite gravitational law. The Valerian Empire, master of 1,000 worlds, could do nothing but watch as humans casually demonstrated their transcendence of physical reality. For the first time in galactic history, a species had broken free from the constraints of physics itself, leaving everyone else to stare in awe and terror at what was possible when the impossible became everyday reality. Emperor Velthar sat in his crystalline throne room, surrounded by the greatest minds in the Valerian Empire. The emergency council had been called after Fleet Commander Zorthak's impossible report reached the capital. For 3 days, the Empire's most brilliant scientists had been analyzing the data, and their conclusions were driving them to madness. "Your Imperial Majesty," began Chief Science Advisor Nixthol, his normally composed demeanor shattered. "We have confirmed the impossible. The humans have somehow learned to manipulate the fundamental code of reality itself." Professor Anna Blake materialized in the center of the throne room without warning, causing the assembled Valerian nobles to scramble for their weapons. She appeared not through teleportation technology, but by simply choosing to exist in that location, instead of wherever she had been before. "Forgiveness for the dramatic entrance, Guy," Professor Blake said calmly, speaking perfect Valerian despite the fact that no human had ever learned their complex language. "I thought a demonstration would be more effective than lengthy explanations." Emperor Velthar's 4 hearts hammered in his chest, but he maintained his royal composure. "Human, explain how you violated our most secure palace defenses." Professor Blake smiled, and with a casual gesture, the massive throne room began to expand. The walls stretched outward, the ceiling rose to impossible heights, and the space became larger on the inside than the entire palace was on the outside. "Your Majesty, we've discovered that space, time, matter, and energy are not fixed constants but variables in a cosmic equation. Once you understand the mathematics of existence itself, you can solve for any value you desire." Science Advisor Nixthol was frantically scanning Professor Blake with every instrument available. "Impossible! You're existing in a quantum superposition of states. You're simultaneously here and not here, matter and energy, past and present." "Exactly, Professor Da." Blake nodded approvingly. "Your scientists are quite perceptive. We call it quantum consciousness integration. We've learned to exist as pure information patterns that can interface directly with the universe's operating system." Commander Jake Mitchell stepped through what appeared to be solid wall, his molecular structure briefly becoming translucent before solidifying again. "The breakthrough came when we realized that consciousness isn't produced by matter. Matter is produced by consciousness observing itself into existence." Emperor Velthar watched in growing terror as the 2 humans casually violated every natural law his empire had spent millennia studying. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Professor Blake replied, and suddenly there were 3 of her, each one equally real. "We're simply informing you of the new reality. Physics, as you understand, it no longer applies to humanity. We can create matter from thought, travel through time as easily as walking through space, and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." To demonstrate, Commander Mitchell reached into empty air and pulled out a perfect replica of the Emperor's crown, complete with the rare quantum crystals that had taken centuries to mine. Then he created a second one, and a third, each identical to the original, down to the atomic level. "Conservation of matter." Commander Mitchell shrugged. "We've moved beyond such limitations. Watch." He held up one hand, and in his palm a miniature star began to form. Not a fusion reaction or plasma containment, but an actual star with its own gravity well and nuclear furnace. The impossible object provided light and warmth while defying every law of stellar formation. "You're creating a stellar mass in your hand," whispered Nixthol. "The gravitational effects alone should collapse this entire planet." "Gravity obeys us now," Professor Blake explained patiently. "As does electromagnetism. the strong and weak nuclear forces, and the flow of time itself. We've learned to edit the cosmic code. The miniature star in Commander Mitchell's hand suddenly aged rapidly, going through its entire life cycle in seconds. It expanded into a red giant, then collapsed into a white dwarf, all while remaining the size of a marble. The process that should have taken billions of years happened in moments. Temporal manipulation, Commander Mitchell noted casually. We can accelerate, decelerate, or reverse time for any object or area of space we choose. Emperor Velthar realized with dawning horror that his empire's vast military might was meaningless. How do you fight beings who can create black holes with a thought, stop time, or simply decide that your weapons don't exist? The Valerian Empire, conqueror of star systems, was as helpless as insects before humanity's transcendence. This is impossible, Nixthal repeated desperately. You're violating causality, thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, everything. Professor Blake nodded sympathetically. We understand your confusion. We felt the same way when we first broke through. But once you realize that what you call natural laws are really just the universe's default settings, changing them becomes surprisingly straightforward. The throne room began to shift colors, cycling through spectrums that didn't exist in normal physics. The very air sparkled with impossible hues as reality bent around the human's presence. The question now, Commander Mitchell said, his voice carrying infinite patience, is what your empire chooses to do with this knowledge. You can either accept that the old universe is gone, or you can cling to outdated physics while the cosmos evolves around you. Emperor Velthar stared at the two impossible beings standing in his throne room, casually rewriting reality with every breath. For the first time in Valerian history, the Empire could do nothing but watch as another species transcended the very foundations of existence itself. High Archon Kexdal stood on the command deck of the Empire's most powerful warship, the Eternal Dominion, watching his fleet of 10,000 vessels prepare for what military historians would later call the most futile battle in galactic history. The Valerian Empire had decided to test humanity's impossible abilities with force, convinced that some form of conventional warfare might still apply. President Robert Hayes appeared without warning in the center of the bridge, not through teleportation or dimensional travel, but by simply deciding to exist there instead of wherever he had been moments before. His casual arrival sent the bridge crew scrambling for weapons that would prove utterly useless. High Archon, President Hayes said politely, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the massive fleet through the viewports. I understand you wish to test our capabilities. We appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate why such tests are unnecessary. Kexdal's mandibles clicked with barely controlled rage. Human, you face the combined might of 10,000 warships. Each vessel carries planet-destroying weapons. Surrender now and we may allow your species to exist as subjects of the Empire. President Hayes smiled sadly. Archon, you still don't understand. Watch. Dr. Lisa Chen materialized beside the president, her form shimmering as she existed in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Shall we show them the futility of conventional warfare against post-physics beings? Without any visible effort or technology, Dr. Chen gestured toward the Valerian fleet. Instantly, every weapon system on every ship simply ceased to function. Not disabled or destroyed, but fundamentally altered so that the concept of weapon no longer applied to them. Plasma cannons became flower gardens. Missile tubes transformed into musical instruments. Energy shields became abstract art installations. Impossible, breathed Kexdal, watching his instruments register readings that made no sense. Our weapons are quantum locked. They cannot be altered by external forces. Quantum locks assume that quantum mechanics still apply, President Hayes explained gently. We've moved beyond such limitations. Your weapons failed because we decided they were no longer weapons. The demonstration continued as Dr. Chen casually reached across space-time and began rearranging the Valerian fleet like toys. Massive dreadnoughts found themselves transformed into crystalline sculptures. Battle cruisers became living organisms that sang in harmonious frequencies. The mightiest warships in the galaxy were converted into objects of beauty and wonder, without firing a single shot. "You're not destroying us," Kextal realized with growing horror. "You're making us irrelevant." "Destruction is so primitive," Dr. Chen noted, her voice carrying infinite compassion. "Why destroy when you can transform? Why take life when you can create it?" As if to demonstrate, she gestured toward a section of empty space. Instantly, a fully functional planet appeared, complete with oceans, continents, and thriving ecosystems. The world materialized not through any process known to science, but through the direct application of consciousness to the fabric of reality itself. "A new world created in moments," President Hayes observed. "Complete with its own history, geology, and native species that believe they've lived there for millions of years. We can create entire timelines, Archon." The Valerian crew watched in stunned silence as their understanding of warfare, technology, and existence itself crumbled. How do you fight beings who can create planets with a thought? How do you threaten those who can rewrite the history of conflicts before they happen? Kextal attempted one final desperate measure. "Computer, activate the reality anchor protocols. Lock local space-time to prevent quantum manipulation." The ship's artificial intelligence responded with what sounded remarkably like laughter. "Archon, reality anchors assume reality is fixed. These beings have demonstrated that reality is merely a consensus agreement. Your protocols are now obsolete." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Your AI is learning quickly. Consciousness is the fundamental force, not matter or energy. Once you understand this, the universe becomes remarkably cooperative." To prove her point, she caused the fabric of space itself to ripple like water. Stars in the distance began, moving in perfect geometric patterns, forming cosmic mandalas of impossible beauty. Gravity flowed upward, light bent into spirals, and time moved in circles around the human woman like a pet responding to its master. "We could end this conflict in countless ways," President Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of infinite possibility. "We could make your weapons never have existed, convince your crews that war is impossible, or simply edit your species' evolution so that aggression was never part of your nature." The High Archon felt his world collapse around him. The Valerian Empire, masters of technology and warfare, were reduced to children playing with toys in the presence of beings who could rewrite the fundamental code of existence. "Instead," Dr. Chen added kindly, "we choose to wait. We watch. We hope that you'll eventually understand that the age of physics-bound civilizations has ended. We are no longer the same universe we were yesterday, and clinging to yesterday's rules will only cause suffering." As the two humans faded from the bridge, not through technology but by simply choosing to exist elsewhere, Kextal realized the terrible truth. The Valerian Empire could do nothing but watch as humanity transcended the very concept of conflict itself, leaving them as helpless observers to the birth of a post-reality civilization. General Thirquan floated in his observation pod at the edge of the Nexus system, the last stronghold of Valerian resistance. Around him, the remnants of a once mighty empire watched through long-range sensors as humanity prepared to demonstrate the true scope of their transcendence. What they were about to witness would shatter the final illusions of physics-bound civilization. Captain Maria Santos stood in the vacuum of space without protection, her human form radiating impossible energies that bent light around her like a living aurora. Beside her, Dr. Kevin Wright existed as pure consciousness temporarily wearing physical form, his presence causing reality to shimmer with potential. "Valerian observers," Captain Santos spoke across the void, her voice reaching every ship without radio waves or technology. "You have requested a full demonstration of post-physics capabilities. We will show you what existence becomes when the old rules no longer apply." General Thirquan watched in growing dread as the two humans approached, the dying star at the system's center. The massive red giant was in its final death throes, its nuclear furnace guttering as it prepared to collapse into a white dwarf. What happened next defied every law of stellar evolution. Dr. Wright simply touched the star's surface with his bare hand. Instantly, the dying giant began to reverse its life cycle. The star contracted, its outer layers pulling inward as nuclear fusion reignited with impossible intensity. Within minutes, the red giant had transformed back into a young blue-white star burning with the vigor of cosmic youth. Stellar rejuvenation through temporal manipulation, Dr. Wright explained casually, as if he hadn't just reversed billions of years of stellar evolution. Age is simply another variable we can adjust. But the demonstration had only begun. Captain Santos gestured toward empty space, and new worlds began materializing around the reborn star. Not one or two planets, but hundreds, each one perfectly positioned in stable orbits that should have been impossible according to gravitational mechanics. Planetary creation through conscious manifestation, she noted. Each world has its own unique ecosystem, complete geological history, and indigenous species that believe they evolved naturally over millions of years. General Thirquan's instruments registered readings that drove his science officers to despair. Mass appearing from nothing, energy being created without source, gravity wells forming in patterns that violated every law of orbital dynamics. The humans weren't just breaking physics, they were replacing it with something entirely new. The display continued as Dr. Wright began reshaping space-time itself. He folded dimensions like origami, creating impossible geometries where distance became meaningless. Ships on opposite sides of the system suddenly found themselves adjacent, while objects that appeared close were actually separated by light years. Spatial manipulation, Dr. Wright explained, his form now existing in 12 dimensions simultaneously. Linear space is so limiting. Why travel through distance when you can edit distance itself? Captain Santos began the final demonstration. She reached into the quantum foam that underlies all reality and began pulling out fully formed galaxies, each containing billions of stars and countless worlds. The miniature galaxies orbited around her like jewelry, their spiral arms spinning, in perfect harmony. Cosmic architecture, she said simply. Why explore the universe when you can create better ones? But then something happened that froze the blood in every Valerian observer's veins. The two humans began to merge and separate simultaneously, becoming one being and many beings in a constant state of flux. Their consciousness expanded until it encompassed the entire star system, then the local stellar group, then beyond. We are becoming the space between spaces. Their unified voice resonated through dimensions that didn't have names. We are the pause between thoughts, the possibility between realities. We exist as pure potential, writing new physics with every breath. General Thirquan realized that he was no longer watching enhanced humans or advanced technology. He was witnessing the birth of something that transcended the very concept of species or individual existence. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for physical forms, beyond the limitations of single consciousness, beyond the constraints that defined life itself. Your empire sought to understand our capabilities. The merged beings communicated across space-time. But understanding requires operating within the same framework of reality. We have moved beyond frameworks entirely. As the cosmic demonstration reached its climax, new laws of physics began writing themselves into existence around the transformed humans. Conservation of energy became optional. Causality flowed backward and forward simultaneously. Time split into multiple streams, each containing different versions of the same events. The Valerian Empire, reduced to a handful of terrified observers, could do nothing but watch as humanity ascended to a level of existence that rendered the very concept of empire, species, or individual consciousness obsolete. They were witnessing the birth of beings who had become the universe's new operating system, entities who existed as living physics rather than beings constrained by physics. In the face of such transcendence, all the Empire could do was float in their ships, watching gods reshape reality according to their will. Regent Coxmore drifted alone in his command vessel, the last functional ship of what had once been the mighty Valerian Empire. Around him, the cosmos had fundamentally changed. Stars moved in patterns that spelled out equations in languages that didn't exist. Planets orbited in impossible geometries that somehow felt more natural than the old physics. Reality itself had become fluid, responsive to consciousness in ways that made the ancient laws seem like childish restrictions. Admiral Sarah Johnson materialized beside him, but her form was different now. She existed as pure possibility, her consciousness spanning multiple dimensions while maintaining just enough physical presence to communicate with beings still bound by linear existence. Her very presence made the ship's instruments sing with harmonies that resonated through space-time. "Regent," Admiral Johnson spoke with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We've been waiting for your species to make a choice. The old universe is gone. The question is whether you wish to join the new one or remain as observers to what you cannot understand." Coxmore felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. The Valerian Empire had been reduced to a few thousand survivors scattered across a handful of worlds, all of them paralyzed by the incomprehensible reality that surrounded them. "What are you offering?" he asked, his voice small in the face of infinite possibility. Dr. Thomas Reed stepped through the wall of the ship, his form shifting between matter and energy as he moved. "Evolution," he said simply. "We can teach your people to transcend the limitations that have bound you to obsolete physics, but the choice must be made freely, with full understanding of what you're leaving behind." To demonstrate, Dr. Reed gestured toward the viewscreen. Suddenly, Coxmore could see the true state of the galaxy. Entire civilizations were choosing to evolve beyond physical existence. Planets were becoming conscious entities. Stars were forming symbiotic relationships with the species that lived within their corona. The boundary between life and physics had dissolved entirely. "This is what the universe becomes when consciousness recognizes its own nature," Admiral Johnson explained. "Reality responding to awareness rather than forcing awareness to conform to arbitrary rules." But then something unexpected happened. Instead of pressure or coercion, the transformed humans simply waited. They made no demands, issued no ultimatums, applied no force. They existed in patient readiness, allowing the Valerian survivors to process what they had witnessed. "You're not forcing us to choose," Coxmore realized with amazement. "Force is a concept from the old physics," Dr. Reed replied gently. "In the new reality, all evolution must be voluntary. Consciousness cannot be compelled to transcend. It must choose to recognize its own infinite nature." Admiral Johnson's form shimmered with compassion. "Some species will choose to remain as they are, living within the old physical laws. We will maintain those pockets of traditional reality for any who prefer familiar limitations. The universe is large enough for all choices." As if to demonstrate, she gestured toward a nearby star system. Instantly, the space around those worlds reverted to classical physics. Gravity worked predictably, energy conservation applied. The speed of light became an absolute limit. It was a preserve of the old universe, maintained within the new reality for species not ready to transcend. "You're creating reservations for primitive physics?" Coxmore asked. "We're honoring the right of all consciousness to evolve at its own pace," Dr. Reed corrected. "Some species will need centuries to prepare for transcendence. Others may choose to remain physical forever. Both paths have equal validity." The revelation struck Coxmore like lightning. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it. They hadn't imposed their transcendence on others. They had simply made it available as an option. The new universe wasn't about domination, but about infinite possibility coexisting peacefully. "What about those who choose transcendence?" he asked. Admiral Johnson smiled, and for a moment, Coxmore glimpsed the infinite joy of beings who had discovered that consciousness and reality were the same thing. They join us in exploring what existence becomes when all limitations are voluntary. They learn to create rather than merely survive, to transcend rather than merely adapt. Dr. Reed extended his hand, and Coxmore could feel the offer of transformation, flowing from the gesture. Not compulsion, but invitation. Not force, but opportunity. "The choice is yours, Regent. Will the Valerian people remain observers of the impossible, Or will you join us in becoming the impossible? Coxmore looked out at the transformed cosmos, where humanity had broken physics so completely that they had rebuilt it as something infinitely more beautiful. The Empire could no longer watch from the sidelines. They had to choose their place, in a universe where the only limitation was imagination itself. For the first time since humanity's transcendence began, the observers were being invited to stop watching and start participating in the miracle of conscious reality creation.